Well, hello everybody. Welcome to tonight's stream. Got Doug Force. He's bringing in a guest, JP Rheaume from Quebec. He's going to be doing an interview with JP. I'm going to be sitting in the sidelines. Share this out, people. This is it's actually history being made. Doug, you want to take it away, and I'll bring JP in.
Thank you very much, Ed. Appreciate it. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, JP Rheaume is a very, very interesting fellow. He is the gentleman that discovered in the library in Montreal Russell Rogers Smith's book, Ho Canada. The federal government thought they had buried it permanently, and this wonderful gentleman in the 1970s who was doing some research for some stuff that he was doing when he worked with the trains, kind of came across a little bit by accident, wasn't it, JP? You weren't actually looking for the book, but you came across it through a librarian that brought it out with a bunch of other books that you had asked for. But before we get into this, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to give JP the microphone here. Let him tell you a little bit about his background, where he's from, and what got him to where he found that book. So JP, I'm just going to hand the mic over to you to talk to the audience and give them a little background to yourself and what you were doing back in the early 70s and what brought you to that library in Montreal.
It was a fellow worker all of a sudden put a little tract on the table, and he said, "You like digging into something fancy or controversial?" He says, "Have a look at this." And there was a little tract, a 12-page tract, and written a very good French, excellent French, I'd say, but it was signed by an Anglo name. It took me a while, mind you, to get that straight. And I asked somebody else who was with me, I says, "What do you think of it?" And finally, I decided to inquire a bit more about the fellow, left and right, phone calls, trying to find the titles he was mentioning on the book, on the tract, like Our Sovereign Rights and Never Ask Your Banker and all that. And finally, I ended up in the Municipal Library in Montreal.
JP, do you have that? Do you have that pamphlet with you that you could hold up for the camera?
I still got it, yes.
Yeah, would you mind holding it up for the camera, just to show the people what you had, what was given to you?
It was this type of a tract. Mind you, it was older than the one I am holding right now because I just digitized it too. And Doit on me fusiller? When it went on the table in Montreal, at the same time next to it was another one by the same author, Smith. Alberta has the sovereign right to issue and use its own credit. At the time, I was studying a bit what social credit could mean and what I had in mind, because there was social creditors around Quebec and on and on. So my curiosity went to that little tract, and I realized shortly that there was no social credit in it. It was strictly historical, political history. Very interesting indeed. And it matched up the other tract that I put my hands on, which was Doit on me fusiller, called the Governor General an Impostor. Also, that the Dominion government didn't have any authority to more or less call men under the flag or under the arms for the war, which was in 1942 then. So all in all, it was quite interesting. And the books on the table that had been put there by the librarian, a fellow by the name of Galland. And
one moment. Jean-Paul, let's back it up just a little bit, please. You worked for the railroad, okay, at that time. You worked as a conductor at that time. And you were doing this research specifically for yourself, or was it for something else that you were also involved in at that time?
As a matter of fact,
I'm kind of looking for, how did you get there in the first place is the real question.
well,
It's one thing to have gone to the library, but why were you going there in the first place?
because wherever I was inquiring about the author and what he had written on this tract, like Our Sovereign Right Inside Canada and Ask Your Banker, these titles, mind you, I was curious about them because well, they were sort of, if they kept up with the same thing that I was reading, they should be somewhere to.
Oh, I see. So you were actually out looking. You were out looking for these books.
I was looking for the author also.
Also for the. Oh, okay. And this is how you came across him in Montreal.
Indeed, because that was the only place where I could get an interesting answer from the phone. And naturally, at different places I inquired, even one woman, when I said, ask your banker, she answered right away that she didn't have the tract or the book or anything. So there was no sense in it. And she was in a line of Canadian writings and writers. So that was, mind you, she should have been interesting, but she wasn't. So by going to, mind you, it wasn't at all in the line of my work. It was in between, I could say, in between shifts, because.
I see. So you were a train conductor. You came into Montreal. You had time off, and then you went to the library here in Montreal with the time off, and discovered what you discovered. Is
that's what I discovered? Yeah, and I discovered also the librarian, rather a fellow about my age, and he had put everything that Smith had written that he put them on the table in Salle Gagnon, which was a certain room where you couldn't take the books out of there for photocopying or anything. It was reading strictly on the spot. So naturally, he came up to my table and he says, "What's in those books?" I said, "Historical Canadian history and political history at the same time." I said, "Why'd you ask me that?" Well, he says, "Nobody ever asked for these books, or these tracts." Oh, okay. Anyhow, I'm interested. So on and on. Naturally, I didn't have a full year to stay there. So I invested about 4 hours, and then I went back to work, and I decided to come back. So I came back, and the librarian wasn't there. So
how long between the first time you went and the second time you came? What, about 2 weeks?
A week or 4 days. Anyhow, it's because I was at the time I was living in Quebec City, but working in Sorel, which was about 200 miles away from home. I'm not 200 miles away from home, so I had plenty of time in between work. So when I came back, went back again in the books, and that's it. Put them there, and I was all the way through because the book "O Canada" was a 120-page book, and I couldn't read that all of a sudden, after all. So on the third visit, my librarian wasn't there anymore, but except he said, he advised the lady who showed me the book. She says, whenever he comes back, I want to see him. So we got to speak about what I was reading and all that, and he said, I've been moved away from that reading department. Oh, he said, rather odd, I find. He says, I've been accused of different things. Okay. At the same time, he informed me that Smith had his office in Montreal in 1942, right next door to where the library was on Amherst Street. So, and he says his secretary at the time was a fellow by the name of Jean Drapeau. Jean Drapeau was mayor of Montreal by the time I was over there. So that answered for the good French of the tract. And Smith, mind you, he was somebody else, rather rather more or less bold for calling the Governor General an imposter and different things, and income tax and a few others. And he had been sued for income tax, I think, in Valleyfield. This is a place I should have inquired. I never paid a visit there. But on and on, it bugged my curiosity, not being able to photocopy what I had in front of me. I took the publisher of the book, O Canada, took the name and the address and all that, and I said, I'll order the book, and that's it. That's what I did. And the publisher said he didn't know me, so he couldn't, I didn't add any money to the order. So naturally, he answered me back. He says, payable in advance. He gave me the total amount of the price, which was $5 a book.
So this publisher was where? He was down in New York City, you said, right?
I was yes, in New York City. Presswood. I forgot the name of that.
Doesn't matter exactly. Just it was across the border in New York.
So naturally, I ordered the book through a library in Quebec City. And the lady who was there when I ordered the book, she said, your book is out of print. And she had a big dictionary in front of her, a huge reference book, and she says, not listed. I says, it exists because the publisher sends me that I got to pay in advance. So, all in all, I said, you can order that from me. I said, how's your custom broker? Is he crafty a bit to get that out? How long does it? He says, roughly 20 days. You'll have to wait 20 days, I presume. So, all right. I said, I'm willing to pay you in advance. Order them. And she said, no, wait till they come. So, on and on, the book was ordered. The books were ordered. I ordered 4 books on the first shot. So, while I was waiting for the books, my brother was asked, he was a recruiting officer for the Air Force. He was asked by the RCMP to supply the names of who we were married to, the whole family, who we were married to, and what we were doing. All of us. I found that funny, surprising, for such an inquiry, for what the heck. Meanwhile, in the newspaper, I could see there was the Elections Act came on the table for revision in Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
There was a chapter in the books that I had ordered dealing with the Elections Act of Canada. So I thought to myself, I said, that's my books that are right now, they're bugged at the border or the customs office. So
they're
right
being
away,
held in the customs office.
Held for some reason. So right away, I thought to myself, I said, I better take another form of getting those books, because I had a cousin in New York, and her father was working downtown. I said to her, I says, get your father-in-law to get me 5 books and of that printer, which was what the heck? Anyhow, so she says, why do you want 5 of them? I says, forget about it. 5 of them. I want 5 of them. I'll pay you when I say it. So on and on. 5 other books came in, and finally, my books that I ordered through my librarian in Quebec City took 40 some odd days to come in.
So They were, but you did get them. So you got 10 books. I did
get them. I finally got them, and but it took 40 days instead of 20. All these things, bugged me. I said, there's something weird with this, and with the contents of the book had something really touchy. Income tax, furthermore. There was a chapter where income tax, the fellow was saying, Smith was saying that he had been sued for income tax in 1947. And he went to court, and the judge sentenced him to $2,500 or 3 months in jail, which was a fortune at the time. And he said, the constable at the door opened the door and said to me, good day. Oh, he said, I didn't pay a penny of fine or did a second of jail. Oh. So naturally, on and on, time went on. The library and got the books. I inquired at the court office, the Palais de Justice court office in Montreal, corner of Notre Dame and St. James, or Notre Dame and St. James. And I spent a full afternoon there trying to find that court case, whereas he was sentenced and didn't pay a thing. And finally, after I struggled even with the greffier, which was the script at the desk, which they call it greffe. Anyhow,
the officer of the court, yes.
The officer of the court, and he said, "Come back and see me in a week's time." He says, "I got a friend upstairs." He says, "I'll try to find out about it." So a week later, at the time I was then working as on regular passenger train, so I paid a visit again to that fellow. He says, "I don't know what you're looking at and what you're looking for," but he says, "My buddy told me to mind my business upstairs." Wow. So all these things more or less incited me to do something else. This book has to get through, has to get it somehow. And the only way I can do it, at the time I was learning quite a bit on computing. I was I could have been 60.
In the 70s and the 80s, we were coming into the infancy of computers. So, I had my old.
I was in the. It was over 70s. It wasn't because at the time I was approaching 60 in age.
Oh, I see. So we're now jumping ahead into the 90s, into the early 90s.
Yeah, around the 90s, close to the 90s.
Well, no, let's get back to the 70s for a moment here, because there's an interesting little thing that happened to you. You met a gentleman by the name of Walter Cool back then in the late 70s, early 80s.
See,
why don't you? We've got a lot of people from Alberta watching this tonight, and they'd be very interested to hear about Mr. Walter Cool and your experience with him.
In the book, in the French tract, the name of Walter Cool is mentioned in there, and he says that he mentioned a few things in the Commons about the BNA Act. Walter Cool didn't mean anything to me, although from what I could gather, he was a social creditor for some sort. Yeah, he was. And how I managed to get in touch with him, I don't remember. But the first thing I knew, I get a phone call from Walter Cool that I don't know, but except I read about him. Walter Cool tells me that he's coming into Quebec and he'd be interested in meeting René Lévesque. Wow. I dropped my job, and I didn't have any connection to get in touch with René Lévesque in the first place. And furthermore, I didn't have a place to receive the fellow. But he says, I suggested that he postpone his visit. He says, I got a plane ticket. Well then.
So he's coming.
Well, I'm coming. So naturally, I met Cool. I think I met him at the airport or something like that, and or at the hotel where he stayed. He stayed downtown. So naturally, we talked about the whole thing and how I got to know him by his name in the tract, and he said that he had more or less known Smith. And he says, I fed him for 3 years while he was doing his research in Ottawa in the 39 or 40. And on we managed to go about. And I says, I can't promise you anything that we can see René Lévesque, but I said, I'll try to get a chance to see his law department. That was the only people I could manage that I had a chance to meet. That was slightly before the referendum of 1980. So we met those two lawyers, and we were for about half an hour with them. We came out of there exhausted. We never saw two guys who didn't know anything about history, but they were shoving, mind you, a question whether to get in or to get out, or to get out of Confederation. Anyhow,
Confederation. Whether to get in or out of Confederation. Walter Cool, his very famous letter that he sent to René Lévesque, saying you can't you can't have a divorce without first having a marriage.
This is the conception that Canadians have, and Quebecers too, that Quebec themselves got into Confederation, and it's not true. It's just more or less. It's just as colonials, you can't unite your territory because a confederation or a federation is a union of territories. It's a marriage of territories, and to do so, you've got to own the territory. And England, as having Canada a colony, she did unite her colonies into one huge colony called the Dominion of Canada. But
yep.
I mean, to get out of there, to get out of that, it's probably on account of that what Quebecers want to get out of. But Smith says in his writings that we're out of it.
Yes, 1931 Statute of Westminster.
1931, and naturally, Cool knew about that, and he's the one who instructed me a bit on this, and Cool did, and Smith did, but both of them did. So how do we get about to this? So Cool got right back where he came from, and 3 times he asked me, when was it the last time you met Smith? I said, I never met Smith. He looked at me and he says, how come? He says, you know everything that he did, and you state what I said, and it's the first time you ever see me. I says, I read what you wrote, and this is where I'm doing this. He couldn't figure out. He says, Smith was a walking encyclopedia. He could talk for hours and hours on end, citing dates, places, and people without even repeating himself. He says, it was fascinating to hear this guy talking. So naturally, I never had met him, but Cool had. So, but he was surprised that I could more or less be interested in all what he is saying.
And Walter was a backbencher, and he was elected federally through the Social Credit Party, and was a backbencher from, 1935 through 1949, something like that.
He was a school teacher by profession.
Well, he was also very famous to stand up in Parliament and be heckled. He was heckled by his own people to shut up and sit down and quit putting this truth on the record that Canada didn't confederate, that Canada needed to federate. And he did that once, I believe it was in 1939, and then again he did it in 1945, yes. Or 1938 and 1945.
Yeah.
And he was a good friend of Russell Roger Smith, but he also
not only a good friend, he more or less he fed him. So because from what I gather, Smith never practiced his profession, mechanical engineer, and he had to more or less depend on somebody else. He was fairly lucky in doing so, because in Edmonton he latched on to Elmer Knudsen, and he was a well-off fellow, and elsewhere in Montreal with Drapeau. I don't know how he managed his way in Montreal though, but he had a good friend for writing what he had to write, and he was also Dr. Gabriel Lambert paid his fine for the court case he had for Doit-on me fusiller, and that was $50 fine. And about this case, there was case 4446 of the King's Bench court. The docket or the folder of the court case has disappeared after I read it, and somebody else working at the archives in Ottawa has asked me, did you get a copy of the case? I said, no. He said, you should have. He said, the case has disappeared. And this is where we find different names that Smith was mentioning about George Shaw Lefebvre, who was a writer for the Board of Trade in England at the time of the, I think, of the Confederation, supposedly.
Well, and it's very interesting. I mean, there's a chapter within Russell's book where he talks about Arthur Buchan. Arthur Buchan was the curator for the archives in Ottawa, where he and Arthur and another gentleman went on a walkabout looking for the British North American Act back in the early late 20s and early 30s. Where they did this. They went to various archives throughout Ottawa looking for this, and they became friends over the timeline, right up until Russell's death in 1968. And Arthur was ostracized for helping and then discovering that the British North American Act never belonged to Canada or the Dominion of Canada, that it was only the property of the Governor General.
The way we got our history is rather odd, because I noticed somewhere Sir Joseph Pope even wrote a book about Confederation papers. And surprising, the inside the cover, you see the photocopy that Smith used for Inside Canada, the cover of Inside Canada, which is surprising. I had the book in my hand of Sir Joseph Pope, and I was surprised to see it there. And I think it was not only the birth of Canada was a miscarriage, judicial and historical miscarriage. It was an intention, like Smith says, an intentional misrepresentation of facts. And they had. Well, it's finally I got around to find why was this taken place, and Smith explains it too. It was on account of the Alabama claims, because at the same time,
I was going to say the Washington Treaty, 1871.
Yeah.
Within that treaty, there's the Alabama claims, and that's what created the 49th parallel. And the British Empire was scared that Western Canada, what today is Western Canada, was going to be absorbed into the United States because the U.S. had just bought Alaska.
I think they were forced by the circumstances to draw the line somewhere, because England, well, the Civil War, what Americans call the Civil War, was not civil at all. It was an outright war, mind you. But ask any American today that the Civil War, was it civil or was it a war? They'll tell you it was a civil war. And everything is done to perpetuate that. Which is, and mind you, England got her feet in there, and she got not only her feet, she got her boats in there too, because
they sank a lot of U.S. ships. I believe it was something in the
200 battleships, merchant navy ships.
Yeah, I was going to say between 200 and 300.
Yeah, and
then they had to pay for
the damage.
Yeah, the damages. Millions of dollars at that time. And who wound up paying for it, Jean Paul? Do you remember who wound up paying?
Well, did I? You think? Suppose it's a civil war, North and South, and the North won the war, and the settlement was not with the South. The settlement was with England, because England sided with the South. Naturally, the North asked for the right place for the damages, and apparently the damages were quite heavy, because
8.6 million at that time.
Yeah,
but you know who paid it?
Yeah, I know who paid it.
Who paid it?
Canada.
Yeah, the Dominion of Canada paid the Empire's fine.
And was paid in a crafty way too. Let's look at it, because the American government was ready to annex Canada.
Yeah.
And not only that, England didn't want to pay, and they were jiggering about for the payment. So the invasions in Ontario, like the Ridgeway assault, the damage that was made there was to more or less to edge England to start seriously to pay because they were mixing. And at the same time, MacDonald was overseas, or he was around Ontario, more or less to patch the mess. And they came to an agreement. I don't know how they came about that. They came to an agreement. Whereas instead of annexing Canada, they said, well, both build, because there was a drastic need for a means of communication on land at the time.
Yeah.
Railroads, there was no highways, there was no aircrafts or anything. So the railway was the only means of moving fast. And let's face it, the production of everything from the prairies was to be moved. They knew the wheat and everything was needed overseas, could be moved. So to make an arrangements with the Americans that they built their own railway, and England built its own railway, the CPR. Yeah. So that's what they did, and that's why they were racing for the West Coast. The first one who could get there could have the best, more or less, part of the traffic and commerce. So in the meantime, Dewdney was surveyor.
Yes, that's what Russell Rogers Smith's father and brothers were surveyors for the railway.
And Smith was born around that time too, 1884. Yeah. So and Riel was hung in on 86. So therefore, Dewdney was staking land, and it was more or less saying that's my property. And the meters weren't for that at all, and that's why today this problem fixed it yet. And naturally,
well, the way
they what happened, what I found in Alberta as the sovereign right to issue its own credit, Smith says he got dope about the situation that there was never any confederation or federation by a fellow by the name of T.W. Jackson. I tried to find something about T.W. Jackson, and no, no, I don't know why, because there's a reason for that. T.W. Jackson was, Smith calls him the judge.
Yeah.
He was a lawyer in Fort Capel at the time. So, listen, see, like I said just a while back, the miscarriage of Canada, the birth of Canada is a miscarriage. And a few things come in between. Things were not clear. Still Smith cleared the matter. I'm glad he did so, and that's why I was interested in digitizing all this, because it's more or less the covered history of Canada, the one that's, what they call that, caché, in the hidden history of Canada.
Well, you did your digitizing, but in the early 1990s or the late 1980s.
Yeah.
You put his books into PDF format, and then you put them up on a website. What website did you put them up on?
Well, and said it was too much for me just to look at this and saying this is going to disappear. And when I said just a while back that I ordered the books on the second in 1972 or 74, I tried to get another bunch of books of O Canada, and I was told that it was out of print. Then I was told it was out of print, and was not even listed. Who could have
reached out?
I cleaned the plate of this. I should have gone to New York and inquired a bit more. I probably would have never known anything.
But hindsight is always 20/20, Jean Paul. It's always, you look back and you go, well, I should have done this or I should have done that. At the end of the day, you were busy doing other things, and you had a life.
I had to make a living.
Thank God that you did what you did. I found those books And I found them on the website you put them up on in the 1990s.
I doubt
Tell
if
people,
anybody would
tell,
have done it.
tell
I
the
doubt if
people what
anybody
the
would have done
website was.
it. The thing was, I never asked for any subvention to be subsidized by
No,
anybody.
no,
I just strictly my own.
out of your own pocket.
Yeah, no, and my own time was mostly time because I remember
Yeah.
digitizing all that, reading the proof as much as I could. It was doing the text and proofing it. This is a two different job. And meeting Cool, Walter Cool, my juice, and with the with social credit. As a matter of fact, I had beefs with them because they talk very much about Bank Canada, and as far as I'm concerned, the Bank Canada is is not Canadian.
No, no.
So
It gives the illusion of being Canadian because it's the Bank of Canada, but it's about as Canadian as the Bank of England.
the Canadian National is right. Another thing,
Mm-hmm.
the union wise. See, I was working. My union was an American union.
Yeah.
I asked. I came up to a point where I said, "Let's have a Canadian union." And I talked with the boys also. So I said, "All right, can you have a meeting with someone who can advise us to do so?" So a fellow advised me, says, "Try Louis Lebel." Louis Lebel was a lawyer in town, and finally got a meeting with him and talked about. We were an hour there, two fellows with me, and I had the statutes of the union, French and English. Surprising though, the American Union, French books, they're keen, And finally, in the end, he said, "Stay as you are." Oh, I said, "Would you find it normal?" I said, "I wonder if a French railroader would find it normal to belong to a British union, or say an Italian railroader belonging to a Swiss union." He looked at me, didn't say anything, but he had said, "Stay as you are." So finally, after an hour, I said, "That's enough." I said, "The books are yours. You can study them as much as you like." And I left them there. And I said, "My card on top of that. Whenever, if you want to bill me, there's my address." I never.
Can you hear me,
anything?
JP?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So, where were we? Where were we?
At the ranch.
Out to lunch. We're back. We're back.
No, okay. No, I was saying if Ontario accepts that government renting on its territory, this is the problem.
Oh, yes. The Parliament buildings. Yes, yes, yes. Let's talk about the Parliament building.
The guy sitting in it, too. I mean, they didn't get permission from nobody.
Nope.
To make laws or to draft laws or do anything. Because the problem is there. Right now, I think the virus business or situation, all the premiers are screaming about the Canadian government, the federal government, which is not federal. They're screaming for help from that government. And it's right now, and they're making a mistake this way.
Yeah.
And it's how to correct that. And the premier's office, the provinces, each province. That's where the problem is. But
And how do we fix that? Do we seek de jure governments in all the provinces? That's the only remedy we have, or the only solution we have. Plenty of remedy. There's plenty of remedy, but that still leaves the problem. So the only solution we have is to seek de jure governments in the various provinces. Once that happens, then the problem is solved.
You using Smith's argument in court. to get
Well,
away.
that's remedy, okay? And yes, sometimes that works, and then they seal the door up, and that remedy doesn't work anymore. And there's a lot of people out there that have tried these various forms of remedy from time to time, and some of them have worked, and some of them haven't. Some of the people wound up in jail trying that remedy again. After it worked once, and then they go to court and they try it again, and it doesn't work, and they go to jail. But remedy is just a Band-Aid. That's all it is. We need a solution to the problem. The only solution is to end them.
Is create your own banks.
No, seat is your government. You don't have to create our own banks. We just need to seat is your government.
Provincial government.
Yeah.
But
We've had that right since 1931, my friend. And then we had the right to seat a federal authority in 1931 through 1982. We could have sat a federal authority, but Trudeau decided he wanted to incorporate, and that's what happened. When he incorporated the Government of Canada, INC, in 1982, and then did the subcorporations throughout the following years, it all left our hands. We then all had to now seat your governments in the provinces.
He incorporated it in New York?
I'm sorry?
He incorporated it in New York or in Toronto?
No, he incorporated the Government of Canada was done through the act called the Canada Act. He took it to the Queen. The Queen took it to her Parliament in England, and the Parliament incorporated us. They did a ship. They incorporated a ship. In 1948, they did the same thing to Israel. The State of Israel was an incorporation. 1923, they did it to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Exactly the same. They incorporated them. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is nothing but a maritime incorporation, as is the State of Israel, a maritime incorporation, both done in the English Parliament with the ascension by the Queen of England at that time, the King of England at that time. The Queen of England gave the ascension to the maritime incorporation document called the Charter of Rights and Freedom, or the Constitution Act, whatever you want to call it. But it is anything but a constitution. But it is a maritime incorporation document.
How come you got to do certain things in the governments of other countries? We can't do it in our own countries, our own governments.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you got to go to Saudi Arabia or go to New York or to get incorporated, or at least there's something wrong with the whole matter.
Well, and the reason they went to London, the City of London, is because that's where the City of London is, right? So what is the City of London? The City of London, as of 1066, had its own jurisdiction of law called law merchant. Over time, that became maritime law. So where would you go for a maritime incorporation document? You would go to the seat of maritime law, the City of London, where the English Parliament is. That's why you went to the City of London, to get a maritime incorporation, to incorporate a ship at sea. And that's what they did. Yeah. Read the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It doesn't apply to you and I. It applies to those that get on board the ship. That's all. But here we are today, Sean Paul, and there, but for the grace of God go you. And I'm so happy that you reached out to us a year ago. And or more than a year ago now. It's been, almost 2 years you reached out.
I don't know if there will be any echoes in Quebec of all this. I'm trying left and right to push my ideas and what your views are and everything, and nothing comes out. Nobody says boo or anything on that. I don't know why.
Well, it's coming. Believe me, it's coming.
You know what, Doug? First time you hear this, you probably think, no, there's no way so many people can pull such a big scam for so many years. This is going on for over 100 years now. What a scam. And 37 million people, okay, less the few hundred that we have here, and maybe the 200 plus thousand people in Alberta that know about this. It sounds, it's almost like a fiction movie, you know? It's just so far out there. And it goes against everything we believe in. Like, you think people are honest and decent and you elect politicians that are going to serve the people. And by serve, I don't mean, I mean serve, like to actually do what's best for the common good and for the common interest of the country and of Canada. And to have this going on for so many years, like, that's why
I still think
you can't believe it.
Yeah.
at the beginning, I think the trick at the beginning was to get people to vote.
Yes.
This is the governor came along, the governor general, and he got everybody to vote. And then from then on, people got the impression that they're doing something, and they got to vote. It's to win on top of that, not to administer themselves, to win. This is the recipe is perfect.
Well, it is, and they fixed that. They were able to get taxation without representation in 1990 with the Little Child case, which allowed a politician to lie to you, and you have no recourse if you elected him, but to wait till the next election cycle to elect the next guy that lies to you. Now that is plain and simple taxation without representation. That's what caused the American uprising against the British Empire in 1776. Taxation without representation, and that's what we have here in Canada. It's that simple.
And how about if you go on the Governor General's website to this day, like right now, there's letters patent on there. Doug, I'm sure you got something to say about this one.
Ed, for one thing, I know the address of the, what they call that, the Governor General's aide de camp.
Aide de camp.
Aide de camp.
Yeah.
I know him. He lives in Canada.
There you go.
But to say that he's not political at all, except I know him.
In order for the Governor General to exist here in Canada, he needs letters patent, and it's a carryover from the Dominion, because that maintains the illusion that we still are sovereign under a sovereign government, under what they call a constitutional monarchy. The problem is that if you look at these letters patent that the Governor General gets to seat in that thing, is that he gets them from the Canadian government. Well, how does that work? Wait a minute, the Canadian government is created by the Governor General, not the Governor General is created by the Canadian government.
So now we're back to the chicken or the egg.
No, it has nothing to do with the chicken. It's super simple. The Governor General creates the Canadian government. States it very clearly in his letters patent. So how does the creation create the letters patent that creates it? It's the same thing with the Canadian the Royal Styles and Titles Act. The Queen of Canada declared herself Queen of Canada. How the hell does that work? It's foolishness.
How can a Dominion become a federation?
Yes, that's the. There's the $64 million question. How does a Dominion become a federation
by itself
without actually federating?
I know. That was I heard on the radio. A professor at Laval, he says, with the BNA Act and all that, he says the number three names the number two, and the number two can rid of the number three. And the Prime Minister names the Governor General. The Governor can turn around and say, "The heck with you."
Yeah.
And we're lovely, happy. We have resources, 1 million, to sustain such a more or less a robbery.
Yeah, trillions in resources, and here we're one of the highest taxed countries in the world.
Yeah.
I think you were talking about
okay.
Conversations with Walter Cool.
Yeah.
Walter Cool, yeah.
Tell us about your conversations that you had with him.
Well,
what you can remember of them.
He was looking. He was. We walked around the city, and he was, mind you, interested what the Saint Louis Castle, the Chateau Saint Louis, where apparently some of the meetings for the Quebec resolutions took place, and apparently that chateau burnt down, and they're not. There's nothing left of it right now. The Charlotte Frontenac is built next to it, and what they have now is a small park. And to say that no, we didn't go too far in matters of the Constitution. No, nor social grit, neither. I think he was at the time he was pensioned, and I was rather young too. I could have been 45 or 45, 50, and he was of age, mind you, and smooth. And disappointed with his trip to Quebec for that referendum. Very disappointed indeed, because I think he would have liked to meet, and I don't think it would have served him much to meet René Lévesque, even to tell him, because at the time I think the question for the referendum was cooked up and more or less at what they say at seized or at. It was fixed.
So would this be in the late 70s, or would that be after 1982 in the early 80s?
That was the 79, 80.
Yeah. Okay. So that
came in 1979.
okay.
I met him later in Edmonton, and we didn't speak much either.
So yeah, he passed away when, in 86 was it, or 87?
90. 1990.
Okay.
That I remember.
Yes.
I don't know how come another social creditor gave that to me, that he had gone there.
Well, and so I mean, you guys weren't friends or anything, but you had met him on a couple of occasions, once in Montreal and once in Alberta. Is that not correct?
Smith?
Yeah.
Or,
no. Cool. Walter Cool.
Cool.
You never met Smith.
No. Cool. I don't know much of his whereabouts. I never met him outside that visit in 1979, and aside from that, I got some of his writings. That was mostly through Eldon Warman that I.
Okay, so you knew Eldon as well. Why didn't you give Eldon the books, the Russell Roger Smith's books?
That was Alberta has a sovereign right to issue its own credit. You gave
him that
Warman
book.
sent it to me. Sent me a
Who
copy.
did?
Yeah.
Warman, yeah. But what about O Canada? Why did?
O Canada, I sent him O Canada digitized with Eldon Warman. I found Warman was very much he was American. He could see matters in a certain way, and I don't know if he could have grasped Smith's writings easily.
Oh, okay. I know he was,
because to impress him, because Smith's writings would impress a Canadian, at least a fellow interested in history of Canada, would impress him. Whereas the thing that I found funny, though, shortly after I digitized O Canada, I sent a copy. I put a copy on his desk to a fellow. He was a former minister of culture of Quebec. He has a printing. He has an edition house here in Quebec, and nothing gave no word or information. It was just plain mob, and he still sees the government of Canada as federal. And I at one time I still got the more or less the file of the names that I sent O Canada and different copies of Smith. Roughly about 50 names of different point of view. And no answer, no reactions whatsoever.
Well,
only lately in Quebec City, I've seen a young girl interested. I put in front of her nobody has ever known so little about so much, and she said, "Where did you get that?" And she keeps in touch.
Well, and here's the thing, Jean-Paul, if people are making their living stealing from other people, the last thing they want to be told is that they're thieves. And Russell's books expose their theft of what they're doing, and they don't want to know about this. Why? Because it interferes with their theft.
It doesn't.
What are they going to do?
They don't realize that they're being torpedoed.
Well, what are they going to do? Oh, yes, I'm a thief. I'm going to give back all your money because we were de facto all these years and we were stealing from you. Well, we knew we were stealing from you, but now you've exposed us for being thieves. Here's all your money back. I don't think that's going to happen to even, these guys will not go gently into that good night. They're going to rage against the coming of the light, as Dylan Thomas once said. They're going to have to be dragged to the gallows at some point if we're not careful.
I've asked my kid who works at the courthouse, I said, ask your buddies over there, I says, where does jurisdiction and competence come from? Because it's the federal government competence to railroads. Indians are federal competence and jurisdiction. Where does jurisdiction grow or stem from? And no answer. And he gave in writing. And the first thing he knew, his boss was moved. There odd things happen. Even nowadays. You take, for instance, Louis Lebel, more or less the good fellow for unions. Well, as soon as I finished digitizing the book, I went to his office to give him the book and show him the footnote that I put on account of him. A month later, he was in the Supreme Court. So imagine that. Torpedo. Judicial, like I said, it's judicial miscarriage.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So
Canada is a judicial miscarriage, historically and judicially. How do you get out of that?
Well, and that's the problem that we have. And people, so long as people got food to put on the table and a roof over their head and, got a car in the driveway and, enough money to go to the lake in the summertime and, take 2 weeks on the beach, they're happy.
In the winter
time, that's changing.
In the winter time in Florida.
Yeah, and that's happened, but that's changing, and it's changing rapidly right now. And the name of that change is coronavirus. How wonderful of them to put such a thing into play here in Canada that is purely a false flag. And it's just what Trudeau tried to do a couple of days ago was a grab for absolute power. Bill C-13 fell. Today he came out and said the Quarantine Act is now in effect. But it doesn't give him he's a minority government. Remember that. They're minority governance. And he tried to, Bill C-13 would have allowed the finance minister to tax without oversight, to spend without oversight. That's absolute power. And for 2 years, not 1 year, but for 2 full years, that would be the end of his term. After he bankrupted and collapsed the country and all the economy within it, he would have thought he would have walked away, because that would have brought chaos to the people. And then from chaos, they would have brought the solution. Here are your new chains. You're now being taxed 125% on your labor. So for every hour you work, you owe us money beyond your wage. Welcome to communism.
After the whole thing is over, with the money they're dishing out now, what will the dollar be worth?
Hopefully nothing. Hopefully nothing. Why? Because that gives the collapse of the economy, and that takes them out of power. They collapse the economy, they go out of power, because what gives them the power? The power to issue currency. That's their power. That power to control the issuance of currency and tax that currency. That's their power. When that currency goes away, so does their power. Because now what happens? They can't pay anybody to enforce their edicts.
I hope that virus does something good.
It's doing a great thing. It's exposing them for the fraud that they are. And people are waking up. There's a lot of sheeple out there.
I hope they do.
There's a lot of sheeple out there. But, I go out for my walk in the afternoon, go get my coffee, and do the same thing I always do. And you know what I find on the streets these days in Toronto? Not any young people. They're all locked in their apartments drinking their Kool-Aid. There's a bunch of old people like you and me out on the streets, and we're smiling at each other because it's a sunny day, and there's no young people pushing us out of the way.
But one thing that I'm worried about, our pension dollar, what would it be worth?
It'll be long gone before they're going to steal that. They're going to take it back. They're going to take it back. It'll be long gone before, because when the economy is collapsing, and so Flattery in 2012, he did the bail-in on his budget. Don't forget the bail-in was put on a rider on the budget in 2012, right? So that they have a bank holiday, they empty the bank accounts. Everybody's bank account gets empty.
You think so? Like what's his name from St. Catherine says? He says, "Put your money in a tin can in the garden."
It's just Duke Willis. Hey Duke, I hope you're watching tonight and having a great time. Yeah, because if it's in the bank, they're going to steal it. And that's just
Anyhow,
we're living in very interesting times, and I'm so pleased that you're still around to talk to us and to have met you. My God, I feel blessed. Thank you, John Paul. Thank you.
Because
and you still got all your wits about you. You're not in some old age home drooling and waiting to die. You're out there. You're active. You go walking every day. Your wife hates me because she thinks I'm going to get you all killed. Every time I call, she answers the phone. Oh, it's that crazy guy from Ontario.
Her sister is Ontario, and actually, that's a different. No, honestly, God, Elf is okay. I mean, runs fine. I'm surprised, even myself, that Elf is, but it won't be forever. Because 87 in the fall, so fellows, I mean, get the best you can out of it. And if I have anything else that comes up, you'll have it. Lately, I put my hands on the Alabama claims, and there's a point that I hadn't touched before, that the idea of annexing Canada officially, find out the meetings, and
well, and wasn't it John A. Macdonald who was part of those meetings?
Well, that he left Parliament.
So John A. Macdonald was part of the Washington Treaty negotiations.
Well, that was on 1871, the 8th of May.
Yeah, but that if you look at the Washington Treaty, it incorporates the Alabama, things that you're talking about. The Alabama claims are inside the Treaty of Washington.
Well, they're inside that treaty. That was the purpose of the treaty. That was the purpose of the treaty. I mean, to settle the damages of the Civil War, and naturally the payment of the damages, and
Yeah.
they did it in a smooth way, even to put the intercolonial railway into the BNA Act, so that people could more or less work their ass off to build that railroad. I mean, the
Yep.
CPR, while the Americans build their own, and it's still going. And
Yeah.
then that,
Yeah.
and what I found funny lately, I thought of the unions of the Canadian National and the unions of the CPR. I think the same union,
Yeah.
different places, probably different, but
Different locals with same union.
it's the same.
I would
union.
imagine. Yeah. Same union, different locals.
And-
You got local 100, local 200, different locals. It's the same with the Teamsters.
Yeah, but the ones those who own those unions are those who ship commercial, the merchant navy, American merchant navy.
Yeah.
Oh, in a way.
Yeah.
The locals.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Connected world we live in.
Fellas, okay?
Are you going to go?
No, that's enough for tonight. We're into
Okay.
an hour and a half now.
Thank
Plus-
you very much, Jean-Paul. Well,
Okay.
we lost you for about 20 minutes. Well, thank you very much for coming out and
Nothing.
telling your story. I do appreciate that. I'm sure the audience appreciates that. Ed, thank you for hosting this for us. And even though we did have some technical difficulties tonight, I think the audience enjoyed what you had to say, Jean-Paul.
Well, it's very, very kind of you guys to more or less to rely on me for a few things. I mean, for the information that I'm able to supply you. And the fellows out west, say hello to them, because I've worked 3 months out of Camp Sack, Saskatchewan, and I have a good somebody over the place. And you guys are hooked up with these fellows. Huh? Smith operated out of there too.
Yes, he was born and raised in, well, what became Saskatchewan in 1905, but wasn't Saskatchewan in 1984 or 1884 when he was born.
1884. I've never seen Capel, though. I've never seen the place.
No, me either. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Well, if someday my
It's a joke. Anyway, thank you again for coming out and being interviewed. And you have a wonderful story. And I'm going to download this, and I'm going to have Sean edit out the parts where we lost you, so that it becomes more compact. Then we'll put it up on Brighteon for everybody as well. And I'll send you a copy. I'll send you a copy of the edited version for your archives, and you can show it to your family at Christmas time.
Okay.
Say, this is what I did.
John Paul, if I can ask, do you have an original copy of Ho Canada from the 70s?
No more.
No.
No.
He gave it to Dwayne, my friend Dwayne, who works with me at Memphis, Canada. Dwayne is my behind the camera guy. He's the one you don't see on camera.
We'll have to bring that book out of
Dwayne's hot little hands.
I know where there's a copy. I know where there's a copy, but I won't be able to get it out. It's the provincial library, legislative library. There's a copy there without the jacket.
That's in Ottawa?
No, Quebec City.
Yeah, there's two here at the University of Ontario libraries. There's two reference the reference libraries. There's two copies here in Ontario.
You've seen them?
Or but they've had them on their website that you can go in and look at. But you have to reserve time to get in there.
Probably.
Don't forget Smith made 1,000 when he did it. Didn't he print 1,000 books?
Probably.
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. But he paid the edition.
Yes. Yeah, he paid for all of its publishing, and that's why he wound up in the pauper's grave.
Yeah.
And the government snatched him up and they put him in their archives. That must tell you, people, you got to understand something. If the government put these books in their archives, these this book is so valuable that even the government wants to preserve it. They just don't want you to see it, but they want to preserve it. It's got to tell you something, because they wouldn't do that unless it had any value to them. They want to control the narrative, my friend.
Possible. I think they never thought it would be digitized, though.
That's thanks to you, my friend. Thanks to you. Okay, well, we'll say goodnight and let you get back, and that way your wife won't beat me up the next time she sees me.
Okay.
Take care, Jean-Paul.
Bonsoir.
Good evening. And everybody, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out